well, we know you already, but we haven't met everybody who's here, and vice versa. And then if you want to sort of take over from there, I think you can, and if that's challenging because you're not physically here in the room, I can serve that role. But if you want to just introduce the folks who are here today and then sort of direct traffic remotely, we'll see how that goes.
That sounds great. We just did the presentation Senate Ag, and I'm prepared to run the show remotely if you so wish. Thank you.
Great. So it's good that you had that dry run with Senate Ag for prime time there.
Smaller room.
Yeah. Well, good morning. I'm David Durfee, chair of the committee, and I represent Shaftesbury and Glastonbury and Sunderland down in Bennington County. Good morning.
I'm Rodney Graham. I represent Williamstown, Chelsea.
Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1, represents Stowe.
Henry Pearl, represent the towns of Danville, Peach, and Cabot.
Charles Wilson, Caledonia 3, which is Linden, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, and Newark.
I'm David Templeman. I represent Brownington, Barton, and Westmore. Thank you.
Josie Levitt, Grandal Chittenden, which is Grandal County and West Milton.
Mike Rice, Bennington Rutland District, Danby, Dorset, Mangrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
John O'Brien, Royalton, and Tunbridge.
Esme Cole, Windsor 6, Hartford.
Heather Supernaut, Vice Chair, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
Great, and we've got Alora Rich, our committee assistant, here as well. So yeah, if you want to take it from there, then Alison.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for this opportunity to speak about one of our favorite programs that you created 10 years ago. I believe in the room, the only individual that's likely in there that won't speak today is Abby Willard, and Abby is our division director of the Ag Development Division. If I'm wrong, please correct me, staff, if there's others in the room that aren't speaking. Otherwise, we'll introduce them at the time they speak.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Salerno. I'm at the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and I'm one of the full-time staff members for the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative.
Thank you, Claire. And then we also have Diana Ferguson, who is remote. Diana.
Hi, everybody. Diana Ferguson. I'm a grants management specialist with Agency of Agriculture supporting the program. So glad to see you all today.
Very important staff at the agency. They keep us all in line, board members and ourselves. I serve as Anson, our Secretary of State's designee. I'm Allison Eastman, the Deputy Secretary. Thank you all for this opportunity today. 2022 marked 10 years of the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative supporting Vermont's working lands businesses. In 2012, legislators passed Act 142, allowing the creation of Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, a public-private partnership empowered with a broad range of levers to invest in the economy, environment, and culture of Vermont's working landscape. Legislators in 2012 had the foresight to understand why a program like the Working Lands Enterprise Fund needed to be created. The Working Lands Enterprise Initiative has been an essential resource for many of Vermont's working lands businesses, and moving forward, Working Lands Enterprise Initiative will be a critical resource as Vermont responds to challenges such as climate change, food insecurity, and global market pressures. Program readiness for fiscal year 2022 recommended appropriation. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Sipple, who's the program lead Working Lands Enterprise Initiative.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Sipple.
Morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much.
I am Elizabeth Sipple, and I'm the program manager for the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative. And I am just honored to be leading a program that's benefiting working lands businesses and the communities that they serve. Your communities, our communities. I definitely want to acknowledge Claire introduced herself, and Diana. We are the three main programmatic staff running the program housed at the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. We work to support the board and get dollars nimbly out to working lands businesses and service provider organizations. I also want to acknowledge the close collaboration with Paul Fredericks and Catherine Servideo from Forest Parks and Recreation and Rendell Scotts from Commerce and Community Development. And you're going to hear from more of the board during today's testimony. So the Working Lands program seeks to be a uniquely accessible grant-making program. We are committed to ensuring that the application process is clear. And we also, as a team, work to be available to accompany applicants through that process. We, whenever possible, work to connect applicants to additional resources. So those might be business advising resources, additional funding opportunities that we know about, grant writing support, et cetera. We also, which is very unique, offer individualized, constructive feedback to unsuccessful applicants. So today, what you're going to be hearing is evidence of what the Working Lands Enterprise Board does best, which is deploying capital and business assistance to farm, food, and forest enterprises, creating jobs, generating revenue, and keeping our working landscape vital and vibrant. To date, the program grantees have created more than 500 new jobs. They have generated more than $55 million in revenue in the 2 years following the completion of their grant. And they are stewarding more than 24,000 working land acres, acres and working land. It is also the board makes strategic allocations with the appropriated funds, and then monitors closely the impact of those allocations. And that is really what we're excited to be communicating with you today through the witnesses, the upcoming witnesses. And much of it is also captured in the impact report that's hot off the press. So this captures both cumulative impact in the program's 10 years of existence, and also specifically FY22 impact. So like, for example, there's a map of funding per county, it's cumulative impact funding per county on page 6, but then specific FY22 funding on page 8. So just to like point out that the maps look the same, but they're different. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, before you leave the chair, does anybody have questions for Elizabeth? Okay, good. Thank you.
And I think maybe it's helpful just to also just give a general, so we're going to have board members speak, and then we have 3 grantees who are currently in the room, the stars of the show, the most important part of the program, who will speak at the end.
Okay.
One very quick question.
Yes.
Is it possible to go on your website and find a list of all the grantees per year? Because I'm curious, because Grand County is only 15,000.
Yes.
And I'm curious why that's so low, and I'm just like to see who applied, and I'd like to learn more.
Yes, and we can definitely also share a printout of grantees dating back from the beginning of the program. And I mean, that's a question that's often asked, like, why is it that some counties have, less, fewer requests, fewer dollars? I mean, I think there's a mixture. I mean, some grants are larger. So especially when we had special appropriations in FY22, we were able to offer larger grants, so that if 2 counties get a $250,000 grant, that really, affects their overall, the funds that they've received significantly. But also, and we do take into account when we're reviewing grants, counties that have received less funding, but it really is a matter of outreach. We do outreach through a number of channels, but that was going to be one of our asks for you, is because some of you are in these counties that are not, really accessing the Working Lands dollar. So please help us raise awareness around the program, with our support. I think we can hopefully talk about that. Yeah, great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth. So next up is Charlie Hancock. Charlie is the vice chair of the board and also of Northwood Board.
Morning.
Thanks, Allison. Good morning. Thank you for having us today. So for the record, my name is Charlie Hancock. I'm a consulting forester based out of Montgomery, working in the northern part of the state. And as Allison just said, I currently serve as the vice chair of the Working Lands Enterprise Board. So thinking about the board, much of the board's work is around governance. The coordinating committee of the board facilitates a planning and analysis process each year that supports the effective and efficient board decision-making, which in turn amplifies the impact. And that's where we really want to focus, is the impact of our work. Each year, the board gathers at an annual symposium to look at the full landscape, both figuratively and literally, and determine the areas of greatest need and the greatest potential for the impact of the limited dollars that we have to work with. The thought partnership here between practitioners, policymakers, funders, and individuals from across the working land spectrum has catalyzed significant program changes each year, which we continue to see as we really rise to the moment. And that's kind of the key here, is to think about what does Vermont need from the Working Lands Enterprise Board and how can we deliver that? As you'll hear later, these changes have included things like making strategic investments in low-grade wood markets and developing new supply chain and market level impact grant categories, acknowledging really that the investments required here are needed at a really uniquely large scale to really move the needle that we want to. The grants review process brings together individuals from beyond the board, both from the public and private sector, and all deeply rooted in the work. These individuals make investment recommendations that proactively address WLEB's strategic considerations and opportunities and enable the initiative to be both innovative and responsive. I really can't say enough about the teams that come together annually to do this work, not only in the depth of their knowledge, but really in the thoughtfulness of the deliberation and the clear commitment to the success of the working lands businesses that we work with. Oftentimes when we're digging into these conversations, it's about the dollars at play and how to deploy them, but so much more than that. We talk about the support networks that we need to get these enterprises the tools that they need for success. So it's about money, but it's about supporting the businesses really collectively as a whole. Since 2012, the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative has invested $13.6 million in grants and contracts to 418 farm, food, and forestry businesses and to service provider organizations who directly support these businesses. These investments have leveraged another $22.5 million in matching funds. So for every $1 in grant funds, we bring in another $1.6 in matching funds to support these enterprises. As Elizabeth pointed out, over 500 new jobs have been created since the project inception, or the program inception, with grant funds supporting or sustaining an additional 1,100 jobs. We've impacted over 24,000 acres of the working landscape, and businesses can attribute $55 million in annual sales because of these grant-supported projects. It's important to note that these investments have had an impact in all 14 of our counties. There's a couple maps in the report that you'll see that shows kind of impact in the past year, but also in the last 10 years of the program. These investments are really designed to support businesses at critical growth stages. The specific focus is on maintaining an active, working, and vibrant landscape, which really is the foundation of Vermont's rural communities and economies. As you'll hear, the need is still great and growing each year. Each cycle, we see the requests for public support outpacing availability of funding by usually 4 to 5 times. In 2022, our business grant round received 130 applications, requesting nearly $10 million in funding. The program was only able to make 55 awards, totaling $4.3 million. So out of 130 applications, 55 awards. WLEB is an established program. We have a competitive application process and a vetted review process. We have a track record of success. And so I would just kind of leave you with the thought that we can handle more money. We can get it deployed in the landscape and we can really increase this impact. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions, but also want to make sure that we have time for everyone else as well.
Committee members, questions? How long have you been on the board?
Oh, gosh. I've been on the board for about 5 years, I believe. I think it's 5 or 6 at this point.
And I think we've got other witnesses who are also board members who will be testifying, but is that a typical tenure? Is there advantage to having served longer and becoming more familiar with the?
There is certainly. There's definitely advantages to having kind of staggered tenures and longer tenures, but also advantages to bringing in new people from different sectors. And I think that the public-private partnership here is also really important because when we see kind of turnover in the public sector as commissioners or agency heads change, that brings in kind of new perspectives, new people. And then on the private sector, we also see that cycling. So I think the change is good, but also the continuity that we do see also helps. And then, of course, our ex officio members are kind of like our core brain trust, because they've been there from the beginning. Folks like Ellen that you'll hear from.
Mike.
Are there people on the board who have received grants?
Currently, I don't believe anybody serving on the board has received a grant. There is a history of individuals who have served on the board receiving grants. In cases like that, we do have kind of a concerted process where we determine, how long have you been on the board? How long have you been off the board? How does that interplay? Because we do see that there's a potential conflict there.
And my question wasn't actually getting at the conflict, it was getting at that perhaps an important perspective as somebody who's gone through the process.
Yeah. Oh, certainly. I think something else to keep in mind is that, especially from the private sector folks, whether it's folks in the forestry or food, farming, our networks, we come as individuals, but we also come with the networks behind us. And so oftentimes we kind of see things come up in board meetings or deliberations that we then bring back to our networks for feedback and then funnel back up to the board. So when you think about the folks that are involved in this process, it's not just the folks at the table, it's that foundation of networks across the state that we really rely on. Yeah.
And I was just going to add too that when you were talking about the competitiveness of the process and the limited amount of funding available and the number of worthy projects that you are looking at, that over the course of the 10 years, the amount of funding, it used to be a lot less than it has been the past couple of years anyway. Yep. So presumably it was even more competitive at, a few years ago, although maybe it wasn't as widely known, so you weren't getting as many applications.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're seeing that balance of the amount of money, competitiveness, but also people being exposed to it. And then to your point about, loggers talking to loggers, farmers talking to farmers, and then folks that know about the program. Yep. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Quick question. If everyone stays in the room and we have one witness come in, we're one person over, does anybody care?
If another person walks in.
If right now we're over, because there's 6 people, I'm fine with it. The door's open, the fan is on. I'm just checking the temperature of the room.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Fine.
Representative Levitt, you're the one in my mind who has.
I'm fine with it.
So if you're okay, all right.
I'm fine. I think everyone should be in the room right now.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Next up is Danny Fitzko, our interim commissioner at Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. Again, for the record, Danielle Fitzko, interim commissioner for Forest, Parks and Recreation. Thank you for taking the time today to visit with the Vermont Working Lands Enterprise Initiative. I get to highlight for you the impacts of the 2022 grants. 2022 brought historic investments in the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative. Special appropriations from the legislature increased grant-making budget from typically is about $600,000 to $5.3 million. It's like a 9 times increase, and that is making just a huge impact across Vermont. What I love so much about the Working Lands Initiative and the grant making that's happening is that they really know how to make smart and strategic investments, and they know how to get the money out the door and on the ground with businesses. These funds were used to target bottlenecks in local meat supply chain and resulted in $1.1 million in grants out to support meat production and processing businesses. We also leveraged the special appropriations to make transformational large-scale investments up to $250,000 which is really huge when you think about we had $600,000 before. These investments resulted in supply chain or market level impact. These much needed larger grants supported businesses in forestry and in value added agriculture, whose projects create new opportunities for multiple businesses across the supply chain. Let me give you an example. Farm Connex at the Center for Agriculture Economy in Hardwick delivers $12 million in food for 100 Vermont producers whose operations are just too small or too rural to really hook up with traditional distributors. I love their slogan, "We go where you grow." It's great. Their bottleneck was their space. It was only 1,200 square feet. They received a nearly $250,000 market level grant to scale up their business, so investments in their infrastructure. This investment will now allow Farm Connex to support more small farms to get food from farm to shelf, connecting more Vermonters with fresh local food. The cost to make real impacts in the forestry sector is high. It's just the nature of the industry. And forest-based businesses this past year received historical investments of $1.4 million. I think you've heard me tell you this before. Forest-based businesses help keep forests forested. This investment is way more than just a business investment. I'm excited today that you get to meet two grant recipients in the forestry sector, Ethan Jevery of Jevery Firewood and Levi Irish of Vermont Natural Forest Products. So you get to hear directly from them, which is really where it really comes to life. Also in 2022, the initiative prioritized funding for service provider organizations. The board recognizes that in order to make historic investments really work, businesses need to be ready and they need to be supported. Investments support business vitality and organizational development and governance of producer associations. This past year, there were 11 Vermont farm, forest, and value-added food associations received awards. One of those was the Vermont Woodlands Association, an organization that supports private forest landowners. I know you've heard me tell you this before too. 80% of Vermont's forests are owned by privately owned. And in order for us to support forest-based businesses, we need to have a strong relationship with forest landowners. Vermont Woodlands Association received a $10,000 grant to support a robust succession planning process because their executive director retired. I suspect many of you know Kathleen Warner, and she did retire. So that plan then, once it was put into place, the results increased membership and donor support by 10%. The $5.3 million awarded in 2022 leveraged $11.3 million in matching funds. So these investments go a long way. The investment in Vermont's working lands is an investment in Vermont's culture, Vermont's communities, Vermont's economy, Vermont's environment, and as we look forward to the Vermont's future. And that's 2022 grants, and I'm due to tag tape.
Okay, before you do though, see if there's any questions from the committee.
We get to hear from some real participants who grant recipients. This is great.
All right, good, thank you.
Okay. Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Next up is Tate Brooks, Deputy Secretary at the Agency of Commerce Community Development.
Thank you, Allison.
Morning.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Tate Brooks. I'm the Deputy Secretary for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. It's great to see a lot of new faces here. One area I guess I would just want to start on is just for background. You know, Allison kind of touched on it, but one of the nice things about the Working Lands Board is the really cross agency interaction that occurs. And so I serve on this board as the designee from Secretary Lindsay Curley. And again, Allison under the Secretary of Ag, Anson Tebbets, and obviously the Commissioner of Forest and Parks. I was certainly very excited. I've been on the board for about a year and a half. And one of the reasons that I was excited to speak with Secretary Curley about this is I actually grew up in Franklin County on a 7th generation dairy farm and certainly saw the value that farming and the working communities have for our rural landscape and our rural communities, certainly with how our rural communities are challenged today. So I just have some short comments. We have some great grantees that I certainly want you to hear from. We have some real tremendous stories. But Vermont's food, farm, forest, and wood products sector are a critical economic engine for the state and especially crucial for rural Vermont. These grants encourage innovation and risk-taking to bring these companies to the next phase. The Working Lands Enterprise Initiative is unique because it invests in the businesses and organizations that are the keystones to support our working lands economy. The Vermont Working Lands entrepreneurs are at the heart of our rural communities. They are the backbone of the Vermont economy, and they're certainly very critical to the $3 billion tourism industry that we have. It's an important source for rural job creation and an integral part to what continues to make Vermont a quality place to live, work, and play. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Ellen Kaler, the Executive Director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. Ellen?
Thank you, Allison. Hello, everybody. For the record, Ellen Kaler, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. Nice to see you all again. My job this morning, very briefly, is to tell you about a very unique part of this board, which is a 20-member board. And as you know, there's the three administrations folks. You have Ag, Commerce, and Forest, Parks, and Rec. There's also 3 ex officio members on the board, and they are in statute indicated as the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, Vermont Housing Conservation Board, and VEDA. And the reason in 2012 that the legislature did this was because they wanted to make sure that this program was set up not only to have strong connectivity across 2 agencies and a department, but also that could have longevity over multiple administrations. So if you think about it, this board has now is on its 2nd governor, and there's always changes within the appointed executive branch team, for instance. And so having these 3 ex officio members on the board provides a lot of historical institutional knowledge, helps that continuity over time. And because, there's always changes in staff and all of that. So we provide a lot of that consistency year over year. But what we also do is we were also tagged, our 3 organizations were tagged because of the expertise that we can bring to the table in terms of food systems, forest systems, capital systems, and the conservation and overall land use is what we bring to the table and provide that kind of subject matter expertise. We have board members, as you know, also have particular roles that they play, so we augment their expertise. But as I said, sort of provide that continuity. The board every year has a cycle. We meet monthly usually. Sometimes they give us a month off over the summer, but we meet monthly otherwise. And over the summer months, we have a retreat where we really take a look at, we learn what we've received from the legislature and the governor through the budget bill to then put out in grants in the coming year. And then our job is to figure out how best to set up the grant programs and put the RFPs out in the fall. So we take a very strategic look at what is the need in the year ahead or in 2 years ahead. How do we make those very strategic grants that are going to be systems changing? We're looking for high leverage. We're looking for businesses that can impact more than just their own business in many cases. We're looking at geographic spread. We're looking at where they are in their life cycle. Are they more of a startup? Are they more of a in growth stage, for instance? We think about the size of the grants year over year, depending on how much funding is available. As you heard, sometimes we always have the small business grants, but then there are those years when we have more funding where we can do 150 to 250. The board wrestles with that every year. Like, what's the need? What's really top of mind? We invite people in as panel experts to sort of gauge that from folks in the field, so that we're not just doing it based on our own knowledge. We're actually talking to a lot of other folks as well. We use the Farm to Plate strategic plan as a foundational document as well, something the board all has copies of. I regularly bring forward the forest roadmap that's currently in production will become an important foundational document when that is ready in terms of recommendations for investments. And then finally, I would say, and I think this was sort of mentioned a little bit, part of the challenge that we face is the inconsistency of the funding year over year. We recognize that you know, the budget is what the budget is in a given year. But in fiscal 21, we had about $650,000 to work with. Then in 22, it went up to 5.3 million. In this current fiscal year, we have 2.1 million to work with. And if the governor's recommend goes through, as he's put in his address, in fiscal 24, we'll be at about 5 million. So he's proposing 4 million, 1 million in base, 3 million one time. And then we have a million left over from last year's budget adjustment where we were given an extra 2 million. We decided to use 1 million this year and 1 million for next year. So if all goes, everything stays intact, then we'll have 5 million again next year. But the key thing is we're always oversubscribed. We had $11 million in requests in fiscal 22 from 181 applicants, and we had 5.3 to give out. So we're always about double of the subscription. Not everybody is ready, and we often then send them to a technical service provider to help them strengthen their plan and encourage them to come back the next year. But there's always good projects that are ready to go that we just have to let go because we just don't have the funding support. So again, thank you so much for the support that you are able to give every year. The more we can have sort of a steady flow year over year, it helps businesses plan. When you think about businesses when they're planning expansion, they always know the banks are there. They always know Vita's there. They always know Yankee Farm Credit is there. But these grant funds fluctuate so much year over year that it would be very helpful to have a more predictable amount year over year. So thank you so much.
Before you get up, I have a question anyway. And yes, go ahead, Representative.
Oh, my question is simple and it might just be something that someone can hit me with offline. I'm curious how many people who have applied for a grant, didn't get it, got technical assistance, and then was able to get a grant?
I don't know the number, but it's often the case. It is markedly better the next year usually because they've really fine-tuned and honed in on their idea. It's not always the case because sometimes, you know, they might be coming back in a year when we have very little to work with, right? It's just sort of the luck of the draw in a given year, but a lot of them is that way. And we in the statute and the intent of the law when it was first passed was they wanted us to not be picking usual suspects, right? Okay. That they really want us to take risks because grant dollars are the riskiest dollars out there, right? And you all want us to be making grants to businesses that may not know how to write grants. Mm-hmm. So we don't hold that writing against applicants, so to speak. It's really about what's the nub of the idea? Is there enough good thinking behind the idea that they're ready for a grant, right? Whether or not they're the best writer is not material to us because we understand that not everybody knows how to do that. That said, a lot of through the READY program that the VHCB runs, there are a number of grant writers that will help for free various businesses to write their grants. And so that is also really helped a lot. Yeah.
Not sure this is a question for you, but since you brought up the predictability or the variability in the amount of funding, and given how drastically it increased from 2021 to 2022, is there a capacity issue within either whoever's making decisions or administering or following up to see how did we do with choices?
It's not an issue for the board, but Allison should speak to the agency.
And if this isn't the right time, I'll hold the question, Deputy Secretary, but we'll come back to it later.
Yeah, I would just say that we are prepared staff-wise to handle the funding that we have. The board has been really responsive in the manner of the makeup of the size of the grants too. We recognize that within forestry and ag, there is a need for larger size grants. If they were all very small grants that we were funding, then yes, we would have a capacity issue in staff. But some of the grants that the board has approved are in the amount upwards of $250,000.
I'd like to point out that we have an additional program staff that came on board to help facilitate the deployment of the 5 million responsibly. And so that staff member is still with us, so we are ready. And that was a critical investment, and that was approved to come out of the special appropriation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ellen. Next up is Gus Seelig, Executive Director, Vermont Housing Conservation Board. Thank you, Gus.
Thank you, Deputy Eastman. For the record, I'm Gus Seelig, and I am the Director of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I'm usually in this room, and I look forward to being here to talk about the board's programs, but that's not what I'm here to do today, except to, as Ellen was explaining, talk about the role of the ex officios and the relationship between our organization and the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative. So we have 3 programs that are particularly relevant to the jurisdiction of this committee. One is that we purchase development rights from farmers. We've done that on 790 farm parcels around the state. Second, about 20 years ago, and there is a particular statute around this, the Vermont Farm and Forest Viability Program was created and housed at VHCB, and you will meet its director, Liz Gleason. You've just gotten an annual report. And that program does business planning and technical assistance, and so far has touched about 900 businesses across the state. I want to be really brief today because the best testimony you're going to get is really about what are the outcomes, what is it like for the participants. The third piece of our work in the Farm and Forest Viability Program is the Rural Economic Development Initiative, which provides grant writing to small towns and businesses in small towns of a variety of types. And fundamentally, as you just heard Ellen describe, lots of people need support for how they want to pivot their businesses, how they want to do business planning, how do they access capital funds, how do they work on succession. And that's the work of the Farm and Forest Viability Program. We do it through a network of both nonprofits and private contractors. We're matching individual businesses in a way that fits them the best. And what we've seen over time, and I served on the board during its initial 3 or 4 years, then designated our Ag Viability Director to sit for me. That's Ella Chapin, who you know is now in the Judiciary Committee. And Liz Gleason took over the program about 1.5 years ago. And in coming back to the board at its 9th year, and now its 10th year, what I see is a really tremendous staff, really sophisticated, thinking about how to best support working lands enterprises. And when, as Ellen said, you'll find, I think historically, that a large number of the winners of those grants went through the viability program, not all of them. And we also, as Ellen was just describing, when somebody really needs some support and help, they're often referred to the viability program. Deputy Eastman chairs the viability program's advisory board. So our goal is to work together to maximize each other's resources, and that's what we do on a regular basis. And I'm here to say that the investment, it's not just enough, as you all know, to conserve land. That's an important part of our work, but how we support the people who are working the land is really vital. And this has been a tremendous initiative. When we first began the viability program, we got the idea from a program in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts program at the end of business planning gave everybody a grant. We didn't have the budgetary ability in the state of Vermont at that time to do that. And I think it's actually great to have a program separate from ours that's making those grants and really providing the spark, the initiative that helps people not just do the project, but also get other financing. The last piece of our work that I'll mention just goes to sometimes entrepreneurs go through this program, they get it, they win a WELEB grant, their programs further expand. Last year, the Rural Economic Development Initiative was successful in supporting 5 different businesses and getting USDA value-added producer grants. So that's another way that we're all working together. It doesn't end with a WELEB grant and the business takes off. Often the business hits a new phase and they may have more growth that they need support to help manage, or they need different kind of financing down the road than the year that they walked in the door and got their Wheel Up grant. So it's a continuing effort to strengthen businesses in our rural communities. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions, but I know you'll have us in a different time. And I think the most important people to hear from today are the people who are actually receiving these grants.
Great. Thank you, Gus, for joining us.
Okay. Thank you.
We do look forward to seeing you again, wearing different hats.
Okay.
Representative O'Brien?
I have a question for Allison, I guess. Sarah will need an answer too. Allison, do you get applicants who are, just because businesses are so creative that you have discussions like, do they really fit in this, farm food forest bucket? If they're a restaurant or they're gonna farm something that, hasn't been farmed before, or, a brewery, those sort of businesses connected to some extent, but maybe they don't traditionally fit in who your grantees are.
Yeah, I think the best way to answer that is, it's there are parameters the board follows, but best to remember some of the funding that we had recently also has ARPA restrictions on it. So general fund is easier for us to fund, but the board is really part of our symposium work is looking at who we wish to fund. That's why you see producer grants, the association grants, the grants upwards of 250,000, recognizing the needs and where the board wishes to put the investments to get the greatest return. So oftentimes I think, the literature that we put out now is, I would say, very thorough, and we don't often get grants that are not able to fit into what we're funding. Sometimes we will note that there are other grant programs that the state, may fund, whether it's through Efficiency Vermont or, funding that's going out of Gus's shop, and we may send them through the recommendation for alternate funding through other programs. But we really do work with the grant recipients to try to get them the end result that they're looking for. It may take time, and I think you'll hear that later from one of our grant recipients.
If it's a value-added applicant, they have to show very clearly their relationship with working lands businesses. And it's important that they document that. And sometimes that is a feedback, maybe they are doing that, so they need letters of support from the farms that they're buying from, et cetera.
Good point, Elizabeth. Great question.
All right.
So, next up, before our grant recipients speak, the real stars of the show, we have our last ex officio member, Sarah Isham, Director of the Ag Lending at Vermont Economic Development Authority. Sarah.
Thank you, Allison. Yes, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, and I'm actually the Director of Vermont Agricultural Credit Corporation, which is the ag and forestry lending part of VEDA. Is an ex officio member of WeLab, and it's allowed for partnering and financing activities. VEDA's role in providing financing to farm and forest-based businesses to enhance Vermont's economy has allowed the WeLab and VEDA to work collaboratively to strengthen the financing available to these industries. By consistently providing grants to businesses, WeLab complements the day-to-day financing of Vermont lenders and banks and other financial institutions. And from time to time, WeLab has philanthropically supported financing institutions such as VEDA to provide innovative financing tools that effectively leverage public dollars to address system gaps and opportunities. So thank you for your support.
Thank you, and nice meeting you.
Thank you.
You're muted, I think, Deputy Eastman.
Thank you. Now we get to the fun part. Brian Leach, owner of Haystack Farm, will be speaking first as grant recipient.
Not sure how fun it will be, but
no pressure.
Yeah, there's been a lot of pressure, actually, Bill.
It's supposed to be great. I'll do my best. So for the record, my name is Brian Leach, owner operator of Haystack Farmstead in Paulet, Vermont. I am a seventh generation farmer. I was raised on a dairy, went to school for mechanical engineering at the University of Vermont, worked in the renewable energy field for a few years before returning to the dairy and co-managing it with my brother and father from 2012 to 2019. While I was doing that, my wife and I were starting Haystack Farmstead on a satellite cropping farm that my parents had purchased in the 80s that had 60 acres of upland pasture that was maintained but otherwise unused. And that seemed like a good opportunity to diversify the farming operations a little bit with a grass-fed enterprise. So Haystack Farmstead, we leased the property for close to 10 years before finally purchasing it from my parents in the spring of last year. So that was a major accomplishment for my wife and I. So as an enterprise, Haystack Farmstead has generated sales through the sale of grass-fed beef, but I have always heavily supplemented that income with engineering work, both off-farm and on-farm. I went as far as working in Malta, New York at the Global Foundries chip fab south of Saratoga. That ended up being a little too brutal of a commute, and they were 12-hour shifts, and I had 80 head of cattle back home that I was responsible for. But I don't think I'm alone in, that's the hustle that a lot of small farmers are doing. It's pretty typical for the small farmer to be working off farm. As an engineer and farmer, my career goal has always been to develop technology specifically for smaller farms to help farmers transition to adding more value on the farm. And so one such system is that I've been working on for several years now is what I call a modular meat plant. And I will circulate just a quick cross section of the actual model of this facility. So it's a pre-engineered, prefabricated modular facility that's intended to be small and affordable, but also very efficient and productive for farmers that are interested in capturing value on their farm. So I was able to secure Working Lands funds to assist with the construction of this facility. We've mentioned the cost sharing arrangement. So we financed a portion of this build, but help through Working Lands has just really made a huge difference. And it's unlikely that we would have taken this project on without that support. There are elements of this project that are aimed at, I would say, broader good that oftentimes are a little more difficult to account for financially. And so that's another illustration of why these grant programs can be really beneficial to people like me that want to work on some of these long-term system-related projects, but the dollars and cents makes it harder to do that work sometimes. Some of what we're trying to achieve with this particular facility, so we have, there's significant impact to the financials of Haystack Farmstead itself. Part of the justification for wanting to do on-farm processing is that over 50% of the perceived value of a packaged protein product is added when it's butchered and put into packages. And so when we're talking about small scale farming, it's a natural conclusion to arrive to that we would want to add more value on the farm to take some of the production pressure off. Because we've seen, through the second part of the 20th century and into the 21st century, what happens when farmers continue to produce more and more and more to stay viable. Eventually, the way that plays out is dairy farms like the one that I grew up on get pushed out. That's just the way it works. So as far as this particular facility is concerned, we've got that immediate financial need that we're trying to address for our operation, but this is a collaboration. We have two other livestock farmers in Paulet that are collaborating both in the design of the facility, but also will be using the facility once it's operational. And in Paulet alone, there are 8 farmers that I know of, there could be more, that are selling packaged proteins as part of what their farm does. So that's 8 in Paulet alone. So that just gives you a sense of how much production activity, how much local farmers in our small towns, how we could contribute to Vermont's overall protein needs. I think that there's a lot to be gained. I mean, there's a lot of protein in Vermont that is it's out of state product. It's feedlot product from the Midwest. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done on multiple fronts. There's the policy side and marketing side where we have to cultivate and protect markets for producers like me, but we also need the physical means of production like this facility. This is a tool just like a tractor. Think of it just like a tractor or a set of harrows. It's a tool that enables a farmer to do a certain type of work to support their family. Haystack's impact on the community and the impact of the grant that we received on the community. If you look at what we're trying to accomplish here, it's about pursuing a trend that gets more people on the land. With this particular model, we were pursuing value, not volume, as I've mentioned. We want to create more opportunities for farmers like us. And this particular facility gives us a unique opportunity to we're not necessarily piloting this approach. There are other processors, there are other farmers in Vermont that own their own processing operations. Several of them are successful with that. But we do want to be part of a trend where we're a place where other farmers can come and learn, come and shadow in this facility, learn how to process meat, build skills, and make that transition. I think it's important for us that going forward, farming technology and the landscape are changing so much. I think we need to be prepared to the nature of what we consider a farmer. We need to be rethinking that, and we need to be open to this notion of farmers building more skills. Our hopes and dreams for the future for our operation, we really just want to support our family and have the missing pieces that I've been longing for in place for the next generation. I would really like it if my children didn't have the early adulthood that I had, spending my 20s trying to keep a dairy farm afloat and trying to start a livestock enterprise. It was maybe not the easiest thing I could have tried to do. But I really want to take the stress and sorrow out of farming that comes and do that with good design and stewardship. I mean, one of the most agonizing things for me as an engineer through the years is just like dealing with something that's broken and it doesn't make any sense. But it's just what you have and it's what you have to deal with. And so I've always just dreamed of, man, what if a farm was this place that was well designed and made a lot of sense and the product went into a market that was safe and stable, that kind of thing. So, working lands, these grants are really they're so transformational for people like me. This is a project that wouldn't take place without the help of Working Lands, and I'm really grateful for the existence of the program and for being able to be a part of it, an opportunity to do this work, and I hope it is continually supported going forward.
Yes, Representative Templeman.
I'm wondering, did you in fact build one of these processing plants, and how much was the total cost?
Yeah, so it's actually under construction right now. So it was a major time investment to design the facility ahead of building it. The rewarding side of that is that every time we go out into the shop to build elements of this, we have blueprints in hand and we know what we're doing. The materials budget for this project is projected to be in the neighborhood of $100,000. So the Working Lands grant of $95,000 has gone a long way towards that. There's a fair amount of my sweat equity that's gone into this,
which isn't included in the $100,000.
It's not included in the $100,000. And so the finance portion of the project is $30,000 to equip it, which is really reasonable. And that's, if we were financing this entire project, I mean, it would be a reach, to be perfectly honest, because it's a very difficult, marketing animal proteins right now. I believe it's something worth working on in the future. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. But the current picture is really challenging. As I mentioned, there's so much competition in our corner of the state, southwestern Vermont, not being sidled up to Burlington, not having a huge hospital right nearby. Like the local markets aren't super strong for us. So the economics aren't great right now, but I don't think that that's reason to abandon the field of work altogether.
Representative O'Brien.
Just continuing on there, I mean, you know how to raise a great beef, you're adding value with your processing. Are you finding, what are those challenges of that wholesale marketing side?
It's just been constant aggravation through the years, to be perfectly honest. Wholesale arrangements, they can be good while they last, but it's very difficult to hold on to them. I find a farm this size, we're not really big enough for those big wholesale markets. So it's typical that you're looking at dealing with like an off-taker that has their own brand, typically that's maybe pulling from a few different farms. And that model can work all right, but you're at the mercy of what they want to pay you. And they can tighten the screws on you if they want, or they can drop you altogether. But we're also, to be big enough where this is your occupation, there's pressure to move a certain volume, which is really challenging to do with direct to consumer sales, because you're a little too big for that. I mean, it's amazing. It takes 2 years to raise a beef, but the amount of sustenance that comes from that animal, it's amazing. It's miraculous, but it can also be a challenge to get all that animal sold because everybody wants the ribeyes and sirloins. But, the more you ask consumers to be creative with like, hey, dice it up and stir fry it, or, it becomes a real challenge. So there's a lot of work to be done on the marketing side.
I was going to say that timing today of having you here is interesting because yesterday there was a story in the Bennington newspaper about your brother's and parents' farm. Seth, is that your brother?
Yeah. Oh, did they make the paper recently?
Age, yeah.
Oh, really?
And so a different kind of success story.
Yep.
And I mentioned it to, I happened to be right outside the door and ran into Representative Chestnut Tangerman.
Yep.
Represents Pollitt.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, the story about the farm. And he wanted to talk about your farm and your business. So I had a little bit of a preview without knowing that you were coming in today. So
yeah. And my brother, who runs the commercial dairy that I grew up on, he's been able to stay afloat by being creative and going out and finding markets, bulk milk markets that are within a niche. And also he's worked really hard on vertically integrating. He's producing his own grain now. He doesn't have a grain bill anymore. These are reasons why he's still in business. And I think across agriculture, we all have to be creative.
Well, we might want to hear from him separately on that topic. But yeah.
Quick question. Have you ever thought about selling to the local schools?
Well, the Cisco truck is the one that's parked in the school parking lots. I imagine has been a topic of discussion in the past, and I would love to. It's one of my greatest frustrations as a producer is I'd love to see the state really commit to small scale livestock producers by making sure that Vermonters were eating Vermont proteins. And I know it's not a trivial issue because we have to be thinking about consumers and household budgets and we get it. In my household, we get it. But I think that this, engineering the future of the small farm, making sure that the small farm is efficient and effective, like we're not wasting people's time. Waste can be avoided. And I think that we just work on that future of the local food being efficient so that it's relatively affordable. And
I
yeah,
think it's great.
Great. Well, we might connect you with some school folks possibly in your area. Because we've been having that conversation too, quite a bit over the past couple of years.
yeah, and you'll have people yelling about the food budget. So that's, but yeah, I think that the sentiment should be there. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Next up is Ethan Jevry, owner of Jevry Firewood.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Ethan Jevry, and I'm the co-owner and founder of Jevry Firewood in Addison, Vermont. I also own Champlain Valley Farm in Addison, Vermont, and I have pigs at that farm. I am a 5th generation farmer and a 3rd generation firewood producer. Jevry Firewood services the Addison, Rutland, and Chittenden County areas primarily, as well as shipping kiln-dried firewood to Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York City. In years past, we have also served the Vermont State Parks as their firewood supplier. So the Working Lands grant that I was awarded allowed me to expand my business at a very pivotal time in the firewood industry. At the onset of COVID, the firewood market just went absolutely wild, and we were, in the process of growing our business, and then we're met with a huge increase in demand that we were not prepared for and did not see coming. In our first year of business, which was 2021, we were able to purchase $180,000 worth of raw materials from Vermont loggers. We also purchase all our parts locally, all our fuel locally, all our lunch locally. All that, everything we do, we try to keep as in-house and in town as possible because that's the community we love. Once we were able to obtain a Working Lands grant and invest that money into equipment to clean firewood, a second processor so we could increase our production by double what we were doing. In the last fiscal year, we spent a little over $500,000 with Vermont loggers on raw materials alone, not including what all our other, costs went up that we paid to other area businesses. So our hopes and dreams for our business are that we are going to continue growing annually. And by the year 2025, we hope to be at 8,000 to 10,000 cords a year that we service in the state of Vermont and the regional area, as well as ship nationally around America through a bundle distributor that we have started to work with. If we were doing 8,000 to 10,000 cord a year, that would put around $2 million in just log inventory back into Vermont's forestry economy. We created 5 full-time jobs and 3 part-time jobs with the awarding of our Working Lands Enterprise Grant. And as we move forward, we're going to create at least 5 to 8 more jobs as we continue to expand over the next few years. With that being said, this project probably wouldn't have happened at the rate and scale that I was able to do it with the Working Lands funds, because prior to Working Lands, we had worked with Vita and taken cash from each of our, mine and my father's businesses as we're partners, our existing businesses, and put it back into the business to, get us to where we were at the point we came to the Working Lands Fund, to help us with that next step to meet the market demands. To wrap things up, I'd like to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to get Working Lands funds and help me in the next step of my business and help grow my business at a very pivotal time for Working Lands businesses in Vermont.
I think we want to thank you too for coming in and being a face of one of the grant recipients. We talk about dollars and rules and so forth, but it's really helpful to see and hear about a specific set of projects. Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, Ethan, congratulations.
Thank you.
I love to see an enterprise expand with your dream. So I've spent my life working in the woods, not a producer, but a logger.
Yep.
And my question for you now is, when you have a vision of processing 8,000 to 10,000 cords annually, are you concerned about the availability of round wood processor logs?
Very, very, very concerned. I could easily grow my business double. I mean, we did around 3,600 cord last year, and I could have easily done 5,000 to 6,000 if I could have found enough round wood. Round wood is always our holdup, it seems. And for me, I mean, being 26 years old and seeing that the loggers I buy from, the youngest guy I buy from is like almost 50. It's kind of, I mean, yeah, my father's 57. So, but it's concerning that the people that me as a value added producer rely on are starting to age out. I mean, my oldest logger I have, he's 82 years old, and he still brings me 2 tractor trail loads of firewood logs every single week.
Well, I get that, and I'm closer to 82 than I am to less.
It's the thing of it is I too, don't get me wrong, I want perfect processor logs every day, but if I have the opportunity to buy something that's not quite processor grade and we can all make the price work and the wood is coming in, that's better than being out of wood.
Representative Templeton.
Just wanted to understand the technicalities of what you're talking about a little more. So it seems that this isn't a shortage of a particular type of wood as much as it is a shortage of people in the industry supplying round wood to you.
Correct. Yep.
And what are the differences between what you would use with ease for processing and this more, I imagine, scraggly type?
Yeah, more pulp quality. So we shoot for an 8 to 18 inch log in diameter, and we like them at least 16 feet and take them all the way up to 24. The biggest, we've bought the biggest processors on the market. That way we can accommodate the high end to the low end, because you might get high end wood, you might get low end wood. So we wanted to be able to do that all with one machine. So we got those, but the other big thing we're running into, especially this year that we had never ever seen before, was the competition we have with the pulp mills. Because of the decreased number of loggers, the pulp mills raised their prices to a point that drove the price of firewood, for us higher than it ever been. When we started our business, we were paying anywhere between $125 and $140 a cord delivered for log length processor wood. And now we're paying anywhere from $185 to $205 a cord in 1 year's time. And we attribute that to, one, fuel, but two, the pulp mill, because the pulp mill never says no to a load, and what they pay is what they pay. So we have to stay competitive with their pricing in order to get inventory for ourselves.
So you're competing with them.
Essentially, we're competing with them, and me being in Addison, I'm, only 35 minutes from Ticonderoga. So that makes it even more difficult, so I'm fighting a huge giant for wood, constantly. But we've actually purchased our own log trucks, and we go to a lot of our own loggers and pick the wood up for them. It, takes some stress off them, and everybody's happy that way. And it ensures a better flow of wood for us.
Are you allowed to use logs from outside of the state?
because we kiln dry everything, we just have to keep track of where that wood came from. It's put into a pile, and everything, if anything, which we don't pull anything out of New York hardly at all, but if it is, it's dried within the day it came in. The day it came in, it gets cut and put in a dry kiln.
And that would deal with any bugs that might be in the. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, the USDA has kind of put the brakes on the ash borer. They don't really track it like they were a few years ago. They've kind of just said, oh, it's kind of too late for that. But we, we do everything we can on our end to stop the spread of any diseases if we pull any wood from out of state, which we typically don't because we want to keep our business in Vermont.
Representative Rice, and then we want to make sure we leave time for our last witness too.
Yeah, I was just curious about percentage-wise, your wood that's staying in state being distributed versus what's going out, and then as you grow to that 8 to 10 cord, how you see that changing?
So right now, about 65% of what we do stays in state, and the other 35%, 35% goes out of state. We do see, I mean, by the time of year that typically shifts. Vermonters tend to buy their firewood green or in the summertime. They've dealt with winter before. When you get into, Massachusetts and Connecticut, things are really, really slow until December 1st. And then from December 1st to typically March 1st, it's lights on as much wood as you can get down there. And for us, it works good because that's when we're slower here. So it's a nice to be able to pivot, throughout the season so we can keep our guys employed and we can always keep wood coming in. I don't want to ever tell a logger I got to shut him off.
So do you view that staying generally the same as you grow in size, or will that sort of bundle distribution change that?
The bundle distribution will greatly change what we send out of state just because the company we are working with is a national distribution company for bundles. But we're seeing, over last year, we're seeing a 55% increase in people in buying wood. And we're also seeing a huge change in the demographic of people buying firewood. It used to be, typically 50, 55-year-olds was your, kind of your demographic and older. And now, we are seeing piles of our generation, people in their early to mid 20s and 30s buying and installing wood stoves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. Next up, Levi Irish, Director of Business Development at Vermont Natural Forest Products.
What's happening?
Thanks. I'm getting good at it. It's my longest day out. So I'm Levi Irish, and I think that before I even start, I want to tell you that you had a question about how, people on the Working Lands Board, and Charlie kind of said his entire system below him feeds into that board. And I think that through listening to me, you're going to realize that. But just sitting here today, I was able to connect with Ethan, and Ethan and I are starting to kind of problem solve some of the things that he's facing, which is very cool. And I think that it's situations like this that allow for that. So thank you. So again, Levi Irish, Director of Business Development at Vermont Natural Forest Products, located in Richford. Also the co-op and work-based learning coordinator for Cold Hollow Career Center and Richford and Enosburg High Schools. I am intensely focusing on forestry currently because I believe that we need to drive programming to meet future regional workforce needs, especially in regards to technology in the industry. We're highly dependent on our changing workforce, knowing that we're losing 50% of our workforce roughly in the next 2 years. We leave 20% to replace that with. So we need, we're thinking about that. At Vermont Natural Forest Products, we produce sawdust, shavings, mulch, and heating pellets. And we're, again, in Richford on the northern border. So it's co-owned by 2 Cold Hollow graduates in their early 30s. They both did the forestry program, a logger, Matt Gregoire, and a trucker, Josh Jarvis. Due to their interest in keeping their way of life alive, industry, and local communities, Josh and Matt, who are always forward-thinking, saw an opportunity with great potential. Their dedication, grit, and Yankee ingenuity being the drivers of the growth of this project, really. So Cold Hollow Career Center serves all of Franklin County high schools across industries, specifically in forestry, led by a board of industry professionals. Charlie actually serves on that board, as well as one of the co-owners of Vermont Natural Forest Products. So this facility was purchased in December of 2021. It was inoperable at the time. Historically, the mill had two owners. Neither was physically present. The first bought it for their child to run. The second was an out-of-state couple. They had incredible theory, but no practical skills. It's not the case with the current owners. I mean, these guys are, they've been doing this for generations. So there have been nights where I've been there until midnight shoveling sawdust out of a bin to run the pellet press because it needed to be done. And every single person on the team steps up like that. It's very cool. And so I just want to say that our current team is a dream team. It's locals with incredible practical knowledge. They're willing and able to tackle about anything. I have been teaching long enough to have some of our team members as early as second grade. And a lot of our students weren't successful in a typical educational setting. Incredibly brilliant minds, but school just wasn't working because we have this certain expectation. So, and so I have so many of them are Cold Hollow graduates as well. And I couldn't be more proud or impressed because of that. Working with them is amazing because the vision is electric. The owners allow for you to not only join in their dream, but you get to build your own. So they function with a growth mindset. We find employees and we help them grow to meet their personal goals. Right now, we have 2 employees currently working to get their CDLs through ProDriver training and funding that we've worked with through Cold Hollow Career Center. In order to better their careers, we work with Department of Labor and Pathstones as well. So the Working Lands grant of $250,000 is allowing us to update faulty, outdated, and inefficient equipment. We've been able to replace a debarker that was using 4 motors with one that uses 1. We've been able to update the yard, increasing efficiency as well as increase our storage, and make technological updates to the pellet mill, including an electrical room and an operating system that we can run from a computer room. We now employ 6 part-time employees, 2 of whom are current Cold Hollow Career Center students, and 8 full-time employees. 6 are graduates of the Cold Hollow Career Center programming, including the owners, as well as host multiple students for learning experiences on site. So one amazing opportunity that we had is that we were able to host Secretaries of Ed and Ag, Dan French and Anson Tebbetts. I don't want to minimize the mill experience, but the highlight for me was getting to pull out our phones and participate from teenagers to Anson and doing our Be Real. Mine went off. If anybody's down to do it after, I'd love to do my Be Real with some of you. But it was cool to have that common experience. So without this grant as a business, we wouldn't be where we are today. This grant has allowed us to get all aspects of production online, but further, it's allowed us to create meaningful relationships with the next generation of industry professionals and create an amazing support network throughout the state and region. We've worked with consultants from Hancock Lumber in Woodstock, Maine, connected with the Northern Forest Center, Farm and Forest Viability. We get to work with Jenny Hull through Follow a Farmer, Laughingstock Farms, Tucker Riggs, Dr. Steve Bick, who's also a grant recipient, loggers, including Ben LePesquier and Ryan Whitaker. We've been invited to present the Northern Forest Center webinar with students and participate in statewide research. We're elated to be part of the forest future of both Vermont and the region. I personally have found myself learning all aspects of forestry and seen absolutely amazing logging, forestry, and facility management and growth, not to mention that I have gotten to operate a lot of heavy equipment, including payloaders, dozers, forwarders, harvesters. And I love this team is always ready to teach me and anybody else. So we are able to keep local dollars local by providing a source of income for local loggers, landowners, as well as a market for previously unusable low-grade wood that was just staying in the woods. My favorite story of localism is the only farm left in Richford, LF Hurtubise & Sons. It's a farm that I grew up on. My cousins and my uncles run it, and we pick up their standing timber and we turn it into bedding for the animals. I don't know of a lot of other things that can not leave their community and end up having that much of an impact. It's pretty awesome. So we're able to provide a locally sourced heating pellet at a reasonable price, providing a resource for an underserved and isolated community. Further, we're able to support local economy through having this facility in one of our most at-risk communities in the state. I grew up in Richford. I'm a single mom. I'm raising 2 daughters in Richford. And what I can tell you that's so hard, and it's a statewide problem, is keeping our young people here. And creating lasting change in a community with limited resources. And speaking as the former and first economic development coordinator of the community of Richford, I know I wear a lot of hats. This mill has the ability to accomplish just that. This meets Richford's historical Milltown feel in a way that keeps in advancing with the times. In the small town of Richford with a population under 2,500, we're able to create a product that keeps 80% of the money in the state, as opposed to fossil fuels, which is closer to 40 or less. We're able to help Vermont meet its energy goals through reduction of fossil fuels, as well as decreased transport of timber and products. But another amazing aspect of this grant is a natural relationship that is developed between VNFP and the local education systems. We are elated to call ourselves the first demonstration mill in the state of Vermont and potentially all of New England. Due to the connections built between the owners and I, with the support of Cold Hollow Career Center and Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union, specifically the forestry program under the leadership of Josh Goss, we are not only support learning, but students are knowledgeable enough about our practices that they can actually lead tours of the mill with us. Where others may talk about wanting to encourage the next generation, we're actually engaging in that. Along with continuing the work we're already doing, we look forward to becoming a regional supplier of heating pellets and mulch. Continuing to work closely with Cold Hollow Career Center to offer industry training and accreditation in a real and tangible way that can lead to increased numbers in adult ed and is valuable for local employers, because we need to be meeting our employees regionally in a way that this adult ed makes sense, and it can lead them to places where they can base their raises and pay increases on that and increase skills. And we want to be able to offer on-site operation safety trainings to students through Cold Hollow Career Center. We are incredibly, incredibly grateful to the Working Lands for this and to the support that's offered to us. It has tremendous impact. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. You're very enthusiastic.
I'm kind of passionate about it.
Any questions for Levi? How are you? You're taking a whole day away from the Career Center today?
So I'm not allowed back to work yet. I am a week into about 1.5 years of healing on a pretty good knee injury. So it's my first full day out at the end of it.
All right. Well, thank you for making the time and effort. Ethan, did you want to, are we at the end of testimony, and did you want to wrap things up?
We're at the end. If there's
the
any further questions, we're happy to answer. Otherwise, I think we're bumping up against your lunchtime.
Thank you for being sensitive to that.
I remember quite well what that meant when I was sitting in those seats.
We have plenty of time for lunch. So if there are questions, any other questions? Okay. Well,
Thank you.
It has been a long morning, so thank you, and we'll adjourn. And
thank you very much.
At 1:30. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of the witnesses. Yeah, and those out in the hall.